Welcome back to this lecture series titled Our Living National Constitution, Its History and Evolving Interpretation. I'm Edward J. Dodson. This is lecture 11 titled Democracy at Risk as Income and Wealth Flows Upward. Hillary Clinton secured the nomination of the Democratic Party in 2016, becoming the first female presidential nominee of a major U.S. political party. Although she received nearly 3 million more votes than the Republican candidate Donald Trump, Trump won by virtue of the total Electoral College votes he received. An insightful analysis of Trump's first 4 years as president was provided in 2021 by Michael Dimock and John Gramlich at the Pew Research Center. They wrote, Donald Trump stunned the political world in 2016 when he became the first person without government or military experience ever to be elected President of the United States. His 4-year tenure in the White House revealed extraordinary fissures in American society, but left little doubt that he is a figure unlike any other in the nation's history. Trump's policy record included major changes at home and abroad. He achieved a string of long-sought conservative victories domestically, including the biggest corporate tax cuts on record, the elimination of scores of environmental regulations, and a reshaping of the federal judiciary. In the international arena, he imposed tough new immigration restrictions, withdrew from several multilateral agreements, forged closer ties with Israel, and launched a tit-for-tat trade dispute with China as part of a wider effort to address what he saw as glaring imbalances in America's economic relationship with other countries. A very important, quote, accomplishment of Donald Trump as president was his appointment of 3 conservative justices to the U.S. Supreme Court and more than 200 judges to the federal bench, working closely with Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and other Senate Republicans to reshape the federal judiciary. The Constitution issue involves the lifetime tenure of judges and how this impacts how laws are constitutionally interpreted. Democrat Joe Biden emerged from his party's convention as the presidential candidate. He chose Kamala Harris, a woman of mixed-race heritage, as his running mate. Mike Pence would soon have reason to question his decision to remain as Trump's running mate. Biden and Harris received over 6 million more popular votes than Trump and Pence, as well as a strong majority in the Electoral College. Accusations of voter fraud were never substantiated by any evidence as determined by the investigation of Attorney General William Barr. There is no question that on the 6th of January 2021, Donald Trump urged his supporters to storm the U.S. Capitol in an attempt to stop the certification of the presidential election. The House January 6 committee's final report asserted that Donald Trump criminally engaged in a multi-party conspiracy to overturn the lawful results of the 2020 presidential election and failed to act to stop his supporters from attacking the Capitol. However, the Supreme Court ruled on July 29, 2024, that a president has absolute immunity for acts within their core constitutional powers and a presumption of immunity for acts within the outer perimeter of his official responsibility. It is now the responsibility of a U.S. district judge to decide whether Trump's actions were official acts or private conduct. Trump's legal strategy was to delay until he regained the presidency and ended the prospect for any trial to occur. In addition to dealing with the disruptions caused by Donald Trump and his fanatical supporters in the Congress, President Biden entered office at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. In less than 2 months, he signed the American Rescue Plan into law, which provided $1.9 trillion in relief to the more than 9.5 million Americans who lost employment, half of whom remain unemployed for more than 6 months. Under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, $550 million of funding was approved to rebuild the nation's infrastructure. A key provision of the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 is the provision allowing Medicare to negotiate for prescription drug prices. Equally important is the attempt to make the large corporations and ultra-wealthy pay a fairer share towards the nation's expenditures on public goods and services. What are described as tax loopholes are being closed and the tax code enforced. Yet, Republicans made this almost impossible by demanding a $20 billion cut in the budget for the Internal Revenue Service. On the 29th of February 2024, the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, Sheldon Whitehouse, issued the following statement. As MAGA Republicans again push the country to the brink of a government shutdown supposedly over deficit concerns, they also demand to slash IRS funding for cracking down on wealthy tax cheats, a $44 billion gift to their billionaire donors that will add $24 billion to the deficit. Republicans want wealthy tax cheat donors to rob the public with impunity. One view of the Biden administration's accomplishments is offered by Charles A. Kupchan, a senior fellow and professor of international affairs at Georgetown University. President Joe Biden has faced a uniquely vexing task, navigating a fractured United States through a fractured world. Against this backdrop, his presidency has been one of remarkable accomplishment. Abroad, Biden restored the United States as the anchor of the free world while leading the successful effort to help Ukraine defend itself against Russian aggression. At home, he healed an economy that had been distressed by the pandemic and put the nation on a path of sustainable growth. Professor Kupchan joins almost all other experts in their failure to recognize the systemic causes of the nation's cycles of boom and bust. President Biden's good fortune is that other experts were anticipating the next credit-fueled and speculation-driven financial and economic crisis to occur during the first term of the next president. They make the case that the nation's property market cycle will be a leading indicator of what is to come. The historical record and the strength of its repetition was reflected on by economics professor Fred Voldvari in an article dated 19 March 2012, appearing in the online publication Progress. Now that the U.S. economy is recovering from the depression of 2008, people are wondering when will be the next great economic crash. The business cycle in the USA has had a period of 18 years. So the most likely year for the next Great Recession is 2026. The Depression of 2026 will have the same causes as the other depressions since the early 1800s. Among the world's activists urging systemic changes that might at least soften the coming contraction is Ellen Brown, a longtime proponent of public banks organized to serve the interests of their communities rather than maximize profits, executive compensation, and shareholder values. In an August 3, 2024 article, she warned that the derivatives monster unleashed by regulators is even more dangerous today than it was building up to the 2008 crash. As she states, when Warren Buffett famously labeled derivatives financial weapons of mass destruction in 2002, its notional value was estimated at $56 trillion. 20 years later, the Bank for International Settlements estimated that value at $610 trillion, and financial commentators have put it as high as $2.3 quadrillion or even $3.7 quadrillion, far exceeding global GDP, which was about $100 trillion in 2022. A quadrillion is 1,000 trillion. The 2008 financial crisis is now acknowledged to have been largely a derivatives crisis, but massive efforts at financial reform in the following years have failed to fix the underlying problem. Speculative derivatives are a form of financialization. money making money without producing anything. The winners just take money from the losers. Gambling is not illegal under federal law, but the chips in the casino should not be our deposits or loans made with the backing of our deposits. Robert Reich, a former U.S. Secretary of Labor, has become the spokesperson for a campaign to finally abolish the Electoral College so that the President and Vice President of the United States are elected by popular vote. Reich acknowledges the difficulty of obtaining a constitutional amendment. So what might work? He says, we can make the Electoral College irrelevant but without a constitutional amendment. Article 2 of the Constitution says states can award their electors any way they want. So all that is needed is for states with a total of at least 270 electors to agree to award all of their electoral votes to the presidential candidate who wins the popular vote. If they do that, then automatically the candidate who wins the popular vote gets the 270 electoral votes he or she needs to become president. What is called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is building state commitments to allocate all of their electoral votes to the candidate who obtains the highest national popular vote. This measure has been enacted into law by 17 states and the District of Columbia. As of July of 2024, the list included California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, District of Columbia, Hawaii, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington. These states account for a total of 209 electoral votes. Economist Dirk Bessemer and Michael Hudson sounded a warning in 2016 that the next financial and economic crisis was a certainty because conflation of real capital with finance capital is at the heart of current misunderstandings of economic crisis and recession. We ground this distinction in the classical analysis of rent and the difference between productive and unproductive credit. We then apply it to current conditions in which household credit, especially mortgage credit, is the premier form of unproductive credit. Nearly all this asset price inflation was debt leveraged. Money and credit were not spent on tangible capital investments to produce goods and non-financial services and did not raise wage levels. Current cutting-edge macroeconomic models since the 1980s do not include credit, debt, or a financial sector, and are equally unhelpful. They are the models of those who did not see it coming. Mainstream media rarely interviews analysts such as those I have highlighted in this lecture series. For thoughtful criticism of conventional wisdom, we have the internet, although it is not easy to identify reliable sources. One does not have to agree with everything a person writes to benefit by time spent reading or viewing videos. Two additional economists I recommend investigating are Jack Rasmus and Richard Wolff. Professor Rasmus teaches economics at St. Mary's College in California. He is the author of a long list of hard-hitting and thought-provoking books and articles. He hosts a weekly radio program called Alternative Visions and writes on economic, political, and labor issues for various magazines. Richard Wolff taught mainstream neoclassical economics for decades at the University of Massachusetts, all the while developing a keen interest in the economics contained in the writings of Karl Marx and other socialist writers. He is a strong proponent of cooperative enterprise as the structure necessary to secure and broaden democracy. He hosts a weekly program called Economic Update, produced by the nonprofit Democracy at Work. You may recall earlier in this lecture series I briefly mentioned the business cycle analysis offered by founder of the American Institute for Economic Research, Edward C. Harwood. Harwood was critical of most economists for their inconsistent use of technical terms and for the unscientific approach taken to their investigations. For example, Any student who takes the classical demand and supply curves to the mathematics department of his college will learn that the point where the theoretical supply and demand curves cross is without significance because three rather than two variables necessarily are involved. Time, the sometimes unmentioned third variable, cannot be disposed of in practice, and two equations involving three variables are still insoluble. Somewhere along the line, Harwood was introduced to the writings of Henry George. From the very beginning of the publication of the American Journal of Economics and Sociology in 1941, Harwood served as a referee and as a contributing writer. The January 1945 issue contained his article titled "The Full Significance of Freedom." In 1951, he was elected to the Board of Trustees of the Henry George School of Social Science. He died in 1980. The American Institute for Economic Research of today describes its mission as, quote, educating people on the value of personal freedom, free enterprise, property rights, limited government, and sound money. The biographical information on Harwood provided on the website makes no mention of his long association with the Henry George School or his support for the public capture of land values and other economic rents. As I have previously stated, the U.S. Constitution does not provide freedom from religion. There are many aspects of law that extend privileges to religion and have resulted in a level of influence over the laws of the nation that are inherently unjust and extremely dangerous to individual liberty. On the 7th of November 2022, author Silas House shared in a Time magazine article the fear he has, and we should have, regarding the spread of Christian nationalism. He writes, Christian nationalism, the belief that the American government should be defined solely by Christianity, is now firmly entrenched within much of the GOP. Recent decisions from a Supreme Court stacked by conservative nominees have stripped women of autonomy even while they've reinstated the right to pray at public school functions. The way of thinking that terrified me as a child is now being embraced by the Republican Party. And soon the nation embarked on a journey through uncharted waters. And with that, we reach the end of Lecture 11.